Hello, and thank you for taking a listen to this week's episode of Secure Insights with NDK Cyber. As many of you may know, NDK Cyber, first and foremost, are a cybersecurity recruitment company, recruiting talent globally and really specializing when things are maybe a trickier location, a very niche skill set, or it might be that you're scaling up rapidly. That's where we come in and that's where we can help, right from your go-to-market hires to in-depth technical red team DFIR style positions, right through to product development, all underneath that cybersecurity umbrella. Now, we started Secure Insights as a way to really shine lights on important areas in the industry, to tackle hot subjects, to really give people a platform to tell their story. Now, this week I'm very excited to be joined by Sri Iyer. Sri is the founder of and CTO at KOVR. KOVR are an organization that really play in that crossover between AI and compliance and how we can look at that area and how we can really fix. So we talk about Sri's journey and his background in doing a lot of automation, a lot of AI before it was this beast that's talked about since the whole Gen AI movement. We talk about the state of compliance right now, where his product and products like it can come in. We talk about compliance there and really what's holding up some really innovative projects in the world at the moment. We also discuss what the future looks like as well. So very excited to share this episode with you all, and we're open to feedback as always. We are live. Well, Sri, thank you very much for jumping on.
Yeah, thanks for having me, James.
Not at all, not at all. So I would have done an introduction there for yourself that the listeners would have heard already. I wouldn't have done it justice. So are you okay to give us a very high level view of, I guess, your background and what's got you to where you are?
Sure, happy to do that. So I would say my background is maybe not the most traditional for tech. So I started out with a film degree in telefilm and television. I worked in Bollywood and for NBC for a little while. Then I joined the Army. I was a staff sergeant in the 29th Infantry Division. Did that for a number of years. Kind of got my master's at the same time, maybe a little more in tech there. I had my own company for a little while that did digital media services. And then I worked at a number of startups that were in aerospace and defense. And then I started working more in the defense and national security space. So I worked for Lockheed Martin and Raytheon. I was the chief architect for the F-35 digital war room. And then I was also the head of a large program called Scattered Castle. So a lot of software engineering, Java, which I guess is falling a little out of fashion, but I was a big Java developer. And then I worked for PwC, got into consulting, worked more in the commercial space. I was director of AI there when I left, started their automation practice, a lot of the RPA work that we did, worked with a lot of life sciences and energy companies. And then started working at AWS. I was at AWS for 4 years before I started KOVR. And at AWS, I was the senior manager for the solutions architect team that was focused on emerging tech. So I had AI machine learning was my largest team, but I also had quantum, HPC, edge, space, a lot of like the technologies that the federal government was trying to use, bringing over those services. And then KOVR started that about 7 months ago with my co-founder, Andy Black. We both at Amazon together. He's kind of more the sales and business side. I try to be the tech guy, I guess. And so, yeah, it's kind of been the journey so far. And I think, with KOVR, the idea, it really came from all those past experiences because every time I would build a new system in one of these regulated industries, whether it was government or healthcare or finance, there's always this big compliance, not roadblock, but like thing that you had to deal with. And as a developer, it was very frustrating. And I was like, there's got to be a better way. And it felt like last year with Gen AI, there was finally like, oh, this could be the silver bullet that might actually solve this problem once and for all. So that was kind of the impetus for starting.
That's awesome. That's a lot of, I guess, credentials and experience stuffed into like a 30-second summary there. So very concise. You've clearly done that before. But I was
A few times.
one point I wanted to like get into, I guess, is you kind of touched on it there when this whole Gen AI thing happened. There was a lot more now, I guess, jobs in this AI space and people sort of turning their attention to it. But going back on the LinkedIn profile, it 2016, 2018, you were sort of playing in that AI space, which
Yeah.
nobody else really
Yeah.
was, right?
Yeah, I mean, since 2012, really, like the Databricks and
Wow.
Spark came out. Spark came out in like 2012, and like this big data moment. And we've been. It's funny. Every time I've worked in AI, it's been like this is the moment, right? Like finally, we're going to get to this. Everyone's been talking about general AI and the risks of autonomous systems and stuff back in 2016. And we at that point, it's always still felt like a very good like predictive algorithm, like just very good at prediction. And I don't think it quite got to the moment until LLMs, right? Like the transformers have really kind of changed the game. And I think it's also this idea that it's now democratized a lot more. Like I think what ChatGPT really did was democratize AI and put it in the hands of everyone. before there was still always a gate. And I think the gates have come down quite a bit. It used to be hardware was the biggest gate, but then Amazon and AWS and a lot of cloud services allowed many people to use that hardware pretty cheaply and rent it. So that got removed. And then, it's become software and tooling, which came out. And now it's really just the ability to be able to use natural language to create, AI and prompts and applications. It's really funny to see actually my CEO, who's not a coder, being able to build apps. Like he's built like a cap table app and other stuff using Bolt and
Wow.
Cursor. And so it's just, you can really see the scope of like the it being sort of democratized and this sort of new workforce is kind of coming about. So I think that's really what's changed. I feel like in the last few years, and GPU costs have been coming down steadily, which has made it even more accessible to people. So yeah, a lot of trends I think have been pushing towards this.
Yeah, huge. It really like genuinely feels like we've turned a huge corner. Like you say, the accessibility piece to everybody to be able to do that is something that will never come back to the old ways. So you touched on it there. Compliance is always been I'm going to get probably hate for this, but a roadblocker or a bit of friction points maybe. So where are we at in the whole compliance space now? Maybe using, I don't know, have you got examples or two of your previous experience of where you hit that buffer, and then we can come on to how this new technology fixes things?
Yeah, it's really interesting, right? So you need compliance, right? Like, so I don't want to like completely like shut it down. When you're deploying a system into a company or an organization, that organization gets to say decide how they're going to handle the risk of that system, and they need like a standard way of assessing that risk. And so it's really important, and especially with AI now, super important with responsible AI and people's data and privacy. We've seen lots of issues where data gets leaked and people are not being compliant with standards. So super important to do it. The problem is that it's very manual, right? And it's for years it has been manual. You've got to have human beings comb through policies, documents, code, samples of architectures. They've got to cross-reference that with hundreds of controls. So NIST 853, which is a very large framework used by the federal government and DoD and even Five Eyes in the UK and stuff, it's got 1,200 controls in it. And even like when you're looking at different standards of that, that's 600 controls, everything from supply chain risk to access control. You're assessing all these things. You need people with different expertise. It's very complicated. Amazon, I'll give you a couple of anecdotes. So one of my jobs was to bring over services from commercial AWS into some of these other regions where regulated industries can use them. So U.S. federal, for example, the DoD, national security agencies, they wanted to use the services. We were, those are billion-dollar contracts that Amazon has, and we're spending close to $50 million on compliance, but it still takes us 3 years to get a certain service like SageMaker or something over into that environment. You've got companies like DocuSign that are trying to get into the federal space. It took them 7 years, right? So it takes a long time,
Wow.
not only to put the paperwork together, but then to audit it. And then you've got to like reassess those systems too. So it's not like a one and done. Every year you want to make sure that you're still compliant and so you can fall out of date. And so I think that where we're at today is that it's super long and complicated and still very human intensive. And we can talk a little bit about some of the other companies and tooling that's out there, but it's still a very manual process to this day. And so it just takes a long time. And I think that's holding up innovation. So I used to work at this place called the Silicon Valley Innovation Outpost, and I was half funded by the government, half funded by Amazon, and it's out in Cupertino. And they're supposed to help companies onboard and provide innovation to defense and national security. As a former veteran, like that's super important to me. I want to make sure that soldiers and on the battlefield get the best tool, that they're equipped properly. But so many startups don't want to deal with that because it's really hard to spend 3 years of your roadmap and burn rate on trying to get a federal compliance thing done. You got to go sell, and you don't have time to spend with the government. And so many innovations don't end up coming to the government, and not just in defense, but healthcare, energy, banking. Like it takes a long time to get through those gates. And so if you can remove those roadblocks, you really do get more innovation into those spaces.
Wow, because I was thinking of this as just as like a slowing business down, costing money, bottom line sort of thing. But you just made a point there of it costs us innovation points. Our pool is depleted, not depleted, but it's not as available because we're not able to get things through. 7 years for DocuSign to sign up to the government. That's there's irony in there, I'm sure, around paperwork and DocuSign and signing things.
Yeah,
But
is it funny? Yeah.
wow,
It's actually hilarious. Yeah. So there's a lot of cases like that, and I think a lot of the tooling that has come out before sort of the Gen AI moment. There's a lot of automation tools that are out there, and it's not like people didn't try to solve it. It's just you're just moving. It usually was shifting the problem to like, oh, cool, it's a web application now. You're still doing the work, but you get to do it in a web application, right? You're moving out of Excel. By the way, it's still at Amazon, we're doing it all in Excel. Like, so, many times you're still stuck in those sort of old kind of places. And I know people ask me what my biggest competition is, and it's really like SharePoint and Excel. It's like that's the tool that people use. So, not hard to disrupt there as much. But yeah, and I think with AI, finally, I did a lot of experimentation last year and kind of see that, okay, a lot of the LLMs are good at understanding code. They understand documentation and language. If you can kind of train them and get them to understand the regulations, they could assess a lot of these, or at least do some of the organization work or some of that kind of thing. And so I think that was sort of that moment where, like, can you actually start getting some acceleration and burning down that compliance debt a lot more quickly, where you're not doing the work anymore, you're kind of supervising something doing the work. And so yeah, that's kind of the idea behind Cover.
You touched on a point there, compliance debt. What is compliance debt? Why is it a problem?
Yeah. So as applications get more complicated, a lot of startups that I'm sure you deal with, they're not just, it's not their software today that you're looking at. You're looking at what their software is going to be 6 months from now. As they keep deploying more stuff, typically you should be continuously assessing that software to say, okay, you just introduced new risk in here. We need to like mitigate that. But nobody really does that, right? Like, they build everything and then they go get the compliance work done, and then they wait a year and then maybe they'll reassess it. And so many systems, and a lot of these are like government systems, banking systems. I know one agency, I'm not going to call them out, but they've got 450 systems that they've built themselves that they operate, and for lots of healthcare and other use cases. Their last audit on a lot of their compliance was 3 years ago. So a lot of these systems with
Wow.
sensitive data, medical information, haven't been assessed in years. And I think it's becoming more of a problem now because, like I mentioned earlier, you've got lots of citizen developers. It's really easy to create new applications now. So the amount of software is only growing and the complexity of software is growing, but the way to assess it and measure the compliance of it is not growing at the same pace. And so that debt increases more and more. And so it becomes harder to kind of crawl back and make sure that those systems are actually protecting people's data correctly.
Got you. So AI is contributing to the already there problem at an alarmingly quick
Yeah.
rate. But
Yeah. It's the
I have a
irony.
sense that, yeah, there's a lot of irony here.
Yeah,
I've got
yeah, yeah. AI is the problem and maybe the solution. So
Well, I was going to say, I've got this sense that you might have a solution surrounding AI that might fix this. So I guess, how can AI broadly help you address this problem that we're facing?
yeah, and I think, like, I'll use some analogies, like, everyone's used ChatGPT, right? So you're writing specific prompts, you're dropping in files, and you're like, hey, how does this, is this document compliant with the standard, right? So you can ask questions like that. It gets very complicated with compliance because there are thousands of questions you need to ask and many thousands of pages of sources of information. And so you really have to be able to do that at scale correctly. So it's more of an engineering problem at that point. But yeah, that's really the baseline of how it works, is that you're giving an LLM some knowledge about how to look at this control. You're telling it what to look for. And you do need experts to help train that and build the knowledge graphs around those things. But once you feel like you've got a good fidelity on that, you can run that process. And so I think, like, in the past, the issue was, to do that training would take years or tons of data scientists, and you need lots of very good training data. With LLMs, you can do that much more quickly. You don't need to train on as much stuff, and so the speed is much more to get to that same fidelity. And so I think that's really been the moment. So I think LLMs certainly are a good solution to that. And I think at a larger scale, you're back to that. Like, now Cover provides a web app for you to do the work in, but also this in the background assistant that's filling out the forms, generating the assessment documents, measuring the controls, scoring stuff for you, telling you where you have gaps in your infrastructure. So you've got sort of this assistant that's always there. And I think that's really, as you can see in a lot of industries where there's lots of regulation or old automated, old processes that can be automated, that's going to be very critical, I think, where the LM can act as that sort of junior assistant to some of the experts.
So you still 100% have a human being in the room somewhere. It's not just like, just automate it and just see how it runs. Or maybe we do get there.
Yeah,
I don't know, the whole
I think you
agentic
could
AI
eventually
thing.
get
Yeah.
there. I think, like, but I worked in automation before. I used to work in RPA a lot and sell that to a lot of agencies and systems that would assess, whether someone should get a visa or not, and those kinds of things. You always still want to have a human, even if you can get the fidelity, because I think, like, there's this idea of, like, AI, humans in the loop and AI machine teaming. I think, LMs are a great opportunity to get rid of all the, like, mundane work, the stuff that takes a long time. It's low end, it's repetitive, but having those experts come in and evaluate and still make their judgment calls, I think that's super helpful. And I think there's actually going to be a heyday for those domain experts. A lot of people are worried about jobs in AI a little bit. They're thinking about, okay, if I'm not a developer, I'm not a data scientist, I'm going to be sort of disrupted in this new world. I think the domain experts are actually in the best place because they can now use those generative AI tools to build their own apps or at least get some scale into a lot of the work they're doing, but still provide their expertise because that expertise, it's still so nuanced, and you're not really gonna get that without 30 years of experience in a field. And so I think like our app, and I think a lot of people that are trying to be successful here are trying to make it so that there's still opportunities for those experts to provide feedback to the AI and work together successfully. And I think that's really going to be the sweet spot for some of these tools.
Got it, got it. And so there's a lot of time-saving angle here going on. So this might be a really broad question, so apologies in advance. But if we could take then maybe that 7 years it took DocuSign to sign up to the government, what could that 7 years in theory be reduced to?
Yeah, so it's interesting that the time is one measure. The other one is like a lot of times what you're doing, and this happened at AWS a lot, is I would have to go and find some engineer sitting in Seattle and be like, hey, you made SageMaker. Here's a FedRAMP, Air Force compliance document. Can you tell me like how your thing matches this? And they're like, I don't know what the heck you're talking about, man. Like DoD FedRAMP compliance. I'm from Kuwait or something. I don't know what's going on. So like you're basically, and like this is a high end senior developer resource that I'm now tasking on a compliance activity. And this is what happened with a lot of organizations. You're using that like time allocated to some of these other resources that is not, it's much better spent on what they're supposed to be doing than compliance, and you're using it for compliance. And so it's the time cost of that 7 years, but also the actual labor cost and the real business cost of using those other resources for this work. And so that people have calculated, like FedRAMP, for example, people have calculated costs an organization $2 million per accreditation, 2 years, $2 million. And so like that's money savings too. So it's the time and the money. And so, for DocuSign or any other organization that was dealing with this or is dealing with it, if you can have those high-end resources be working on what they're supposed to be, you might be able to, pitch, develop new products, new lines of business. You might have new innovations that you couldn't do before, right? Like, so you're unblocking all those other teams too. It's not just getting the compliance work done. So I think that's really the big thing, is that you can unblock all these other types of resources that are somehow involved in the compliance process as well.
So it's a time thing, it's a resource thing, it's a money thing. It plays into a lot of
Mhm.
these areas. Nice. Okay. And so your solution specifically then cover that's where this comes in. This is the whole world it addresses, right?
Yeah, so we try to out of the gate, we're really focused on those first couple of phases where we felt like most of the hours go to. So you're typically spending 1,500 hours, or you're hiring like a consulting company and you're paying them like 300 to $500,000 to come in and do just like a full assessment. Like they're going to look at all the information, they're going to do a gap analysis, they're going to generate some reports. All that is sort of done in a period of 8 months and several $100,000 to $1 million. That's what we do in 15 minutes. So our promise is like we can do that whole
Wow.
process in 15 minutes. And then on top of that, we are adding features to then do the rest of it too. So we want to, slowly help you do the remediation, not just tell you what's wrong, but actually have some ability for you to automatically remediate issues, provide you the ability to have understand your compliance continuously and monitor things. So we're going to add more features, but that first 15 minutes, we want to provide a lot of value. And I think with AI, that's really like, and most of these new startups, right? Like you want to really give a 10x to 100x of value, because if someone's going to shift from their current process to your new process, it's got to be very valuable. And so we really want to make sure that initial experience is really providing that.
So I'm just thinking out loud then, how do you kind of address isn't there some potential of like ethical concerns around like data privacy, data security with your technology coming in?
Oh, 100%. I'm glad you asked that. And I think that's one of the ones that people don't think about very often. So we do offer different options for our software, and it's actually a little bit unique. So we are a SaaS company. We offer multi-tenant SaaS. You can get it commercially. You access it through a browser. But we also do private deployments. And one of the things different from any other GRC tool is that you can deploy cover entirely into your own environment. It runs on very, very small models. It can run on any cloud environment, any architecture, on-prem, any hardware. So we've engineered it in such a way that you can deploy it into your own boundary. And so when it connects to stuff, it's within your security boundary, so you don't have any external connections. The other thing that's really unique about Cover is that it's compliant to all sorts of domains. So it can be deployed on top secret fabrics within the US government. It's compliant to FedRAMP. It's compliant to ISO. So we have lots of compliance standards that we comply to as well. The other different thing is that you don't need to have it connect to anything. So it can run completely offline, disconnected from the internet or any network connection. You can just plug a stick in, drop files in if you want to. A lot of people love that because if you don't have connections from us to your systems, the LLM doesn't call out to anything. Your information doesn't go over to ChatGPT or anything like that. It's all done in house. And so you can run very efficiently that way. We also allow for unlimited usage. So there's no token cost with Cover. Very different from any other sort of, most AI companies. We don't charge for usage in any way. You can run the models as much as you want with as much data as you want to for one fixed fee. They don't charge for any sort of variable costs.
Wow. And that non-SaaS deployment, the on-site stuff, I know one of the arguments for going to more SaaS orientated work was it's much easier, quicker, and the rest of it. But I'm going to get the impression that it's not very hard to implement.
No, it is very hard to implement for us. It's
Oh, for
great for
you.
the user.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. It's great for the customer because it's just a quick deployment. It runs on containers. It spins up very easily. We integrate with a lot of different environments. But for us, the engineering task is massive, right? Because we've got to maintain different baselines. I was just deploying to an environment the other day. They don't have the right NVIDIA chips in that environment. They have chips from 2017. So I've got to run models from 2024 on chips from 2017. And so, we have to be able to support all kinds of different environments. We have to do lots of testing and have many, many different variations of our code base running. So my engineers hate that, but the customers like it. So it's, definitely a balance there of the two things. So, but you learn a lot too about, what you can really accomplish with smaller models. I think people tend to gravitate towards the next big model that's coming out, whether it's Claude or GPT-4, or, all those kind of things. But a lot of the smaller models you can get a lot of bang for your buck. You just got to be very efficient with how you use them. So.
You mentioned a point earlier around, you've got to really come with like 10x, 100xing, whatever to make, to catch somebody's eye. And just listening to this, it seems like a bit of a no-brainer, to be honest. If I'm on a very old, Excel or SharePoint manual systems, something like this comes along, it's a no-brainer. Let's go for it, right? But did you get sort of pushback from, oh, it's new, I'm not sure? What's the sort of the objections you come up against in this space?
Yeah, and it's funny. I harken back to like even in consulting when I used to sell automation, just RPA, right? Just the robotics process automation stuff. Like there was always this adage in the sales process where like sell them the product, but don't sell them a new process. Because if you try to re-engineer their process, it's never going to happen. Because people that are working in a current compliance process or regulated environment of some kind, they got to do everything by the book. They've got a way that they're doing things. They know it. They know how it works, and even though it takes a while, that's how they want to do it. And so if you try to change that, it's going to be really hard to sell them on anything. And so one of the things we really try to do with Cover is like, how do we just kind of augment their process so that they can kind of still stick with it? And I think that's one of the key things is that there's a switching cost, right? Both in time and money. And in some of these, and this is more true for my product because it's in regulated industries, the switching cost is high. People typically don't want to switch. It takes even years to get contracting done for things, right? It's a much slower market. And it has accelerated, don't get me wrong, in the last few years. But it's still people that are resistant to change. And I think that you have to kind of convince them that it's worth it and it's not going to violate anything that they're doing and they can use it with what their current process is. And I think that's a big thing. I had that back to that visa example. I built a system once that helped automate the visa sort of adjudication process. I won't mention what it was for, but yeah, so I had to get all these adjudicators that had been doing this for years to be like, okay, we're good with this. And so I had to run like a double blind study. I had to get them to use the tool and another group to not use it and score them the same way and get them some comfort with it. And so like trust has always been the big issue with AI. Like even today and what was yesterday, you got to get people to trust the system somehow. And, for security, the bar is very high. The sort of the skepticism is very high. So you really have to kind of find ways to convince people that these are good answers. We use a lot of our own experts and people that they trust to validate it. And so, there's got to be a lot of that goes on.
Wow. And I guess then this space is rapidly evolving, even quicker than we thought. I think we speak to a lot of AI orientated tech organizations, and they might have a roadmap of that'll happen 6 months down the road, and in fact it happens 4 months. So it's being brought forward, which is something I've never seen before, which is awesome. What are you excited about for the next 6-12 months?
Oh boy. Well, I'm very interested in the agentic workflows. I think like most people, I see that being a huge future, especially for SaaS applications. I think, most of us have had to build connectors and APIs before. And I think that the world of MCPs, right, is gonna really, really change that quite a bit. And it's already starting to where You can really have LLMs doing all that work. Information is no longer behind some sort of like barrier of configuration, really. And so I think these agentic workflows are going to be a big game changer. So that's already happening. I also think that moving AI to the edge is a big deal, and it's different than kind of what even Harvard's a little bit focused on it, but AWS was very focused on it. But really thinking about running AI on satellite vehicles, on edge devices, IoT sensors. You can think about this idea that like you've got small compute that exists in space, right? Within satellites, you've got 1U of compute, and so a lot of times you're taking imagery, you're sending it back down and analyzing it. And we did test cases where you can analyze that imagery on the satellite and say like, hey, there's a forest fire starting over here. We can retask the satellites immediately and get onto that target a lot more quickly. And so there's huge use cases for processing things at the edge. And this is where I think like the compute and power is now moving towards smaller devices. And so really being able to see what those smaller devices can do in the field. And we're seeing that in compliance too, right? You're getting more footprint of devices and compute happening across all kinds of stuff. Your fridge is talking to your car. You're like, I'm getting alerts here in India about my wife opening the garage back in DC, right? So like everything is super connected. And so like, how do you make sure all that stuff is secure and compliant, and how do you make sure that it's working correctly? And so like being able to think about the edge use cases is really important, I think, and that's what's happening, I think, in the next year or so. So
It's balmy what's going on right now. You kind of answered it there, but the challenges that come with a more, if we get AI to the edge, brilliant. It does all this really sexy stuff, but there's challenges, there's risks in here, right?
yeah, 100%. And I think a lot of startups should probably start thinking about that. There was ISO 42001. NIST just released new guidance on responsible AI. They did that last year. They're releasing some new things this year. There's a lot of regulation coming out around AI, and a lot of companies are very hesitant for if you've got a product that you're selling and you go in there and say, hey, it's using ChatGPT or something, big enterprises are very hesitant to take that product on into their enterprise. And so really trying to figure out what are the guardrails, how do you secure it? I think, like I mentioned, a lot of companies think about compliance and security after they've already built their product. Really helpful to start thinking about from the beginning, right? How do I bake that in? How do I bake in those checks? How do I make sure that these frameworks are working? There's a lot of cool companies too on the AI testing space, red teaming space that I think are being very innovative. Even in the UK, there's a couple of very cool companies out of University of Birmingham and stuff like that. So really interesting space. And I think that's something that a lot of startups that are going to be using Gen AI need to think about, is that the regulation is catching up, and you've got to start kind of thinking about how to integrate that into your pipeline.
Yeah, absolutely. There's so much flying around. It's really exciting to see, genuinely getting all the news alerts through, the buzzes, whatever's going on, and you're like, okay, cool. There's a tech that does this now. Never thought I'd see that, which is pretty incredible. And Sri, I've got to ask you, as someone who's been with the Amazons of this world, now doing the startup thing, what's the advice you'd give if you could share one or two
Oh
snippets
man.
of
I mean, it's a little early. I think like, leaving a very stable job and a stable paycheck to do a startup, a little early for me to know if that was the best move, but it's exciting. I think you have to be prepared. Like most people would probably know that you got to wear a lot of hats when you're in a startup. Like, I love coding and I love tech, but I've got to be, good at sales. You got to be able to fundraise. I think you have to at every day be willing to do something different and new. And if your personality lines up with that, it's awesome. If it doesn't, you're gonna have a real struggle. I think the other thing is, keeping a good idea of where your wins are really important. I think my co-founder and I always, I think we have a high bar for like, oh man, we have not closed this many sales by now. We haven't done this XYZ by now. But then when you zoom out, you're like, man, actually, we're doing okay. Like it's important to kind of keep track of what's going well, just as much as what's not going well, because at any given point, like it's funny. You always feel like, oh man, if I get to this bar, we're good. Like I can coast, like we're stable. But every time we get to the next bar, it's like, oh no, we're not good. There's still like 20 things left to do. So I think it's important to take those moments to like appreciate what's going well. And I also think it's good to still look and see what's going on in the rest of the world. Like a lot of time you're very focused on what your company's doing in your market, but the rest of the world is still happening. And it's easier at a larger company to be more plugged into that because the ecosystem is definitely giving you more information. You're getting feeds and you've got connections across the whole organization. It's harder in a startup because you're much smaller and you're just meeting the same people every day. And so I think it's really super important to kind of keep apprised of what's going on. in the rest of the world, other regulated markets, other industries, with the technology. So I think it's been really interesting. I got like a whole list of other ones, but those are sort of my big ones for today, I guess. Ask me
That's
tomorrow,
good.
and you might get a different answer. But that's it.
To be more milestones here. I think you raise a really good point there around, speak to a lot of people and they say a similar thing of, they're, I don't know, 2 or 3 years into their startup journey and they have to remind themselves to celebrate the wins. And, 2 years ago, we'd have given anything to be in this position we're in now. So like there's this rough stuff going on, but equally there's some pretty cool stuff happening. So no, I appreciate you sharing. Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, Sri, thank you for taking the time. I know we bounced around a few different areas there, and I appreciate you sharing all your insights and everything. I'm sure that the listeners will as well. I will leave you get back to your day, and we'll be in touch soon.
No, thank you so much, James. Really enjoyed it. Thanks for all the great questions, and yeah, excited to see how this turns out.
Cheers, man. Take
Yeah.
care.